In the city of Medina, in the year 83 AH, 702 CE, under a sky that bore witness to generations of prophets, a child was born into the purest of lineages. He was not born into wealth or power by worldly standards, but into a home where wisdom, sacrifice, and divine guidance were a way of life. That child was Jafar ibn Muhammad, a.s., who would later become known as Imam al-Sadiq, the sixth divinely appointed Imam of the Shia Muslims and the ocean of knowledge that quenched the thirst of generations. He was born into two noble lineages. His father, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, a.s., was the fifth Imam, and a direct descendant of Imam Hussein, a.s., the martyr of Karbala. His mother, Farwa, was a pious and knowledgeable woman, descended from Abu Bakr, the first caliph in Sunni tradition. In this unique way, Imam Jafar, a.s., became a living bridge between the Muslim world, carrying the blood of both revered lines. From the very beginning, there was something different about this child. It wasn't only the depth in his gaze or the unusual calm in his presence, it was the silence that fell over people when he entered a room, the way elders paused to listen even when he said little. His father, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, a.s., would often hold him in his arms during scholarly gatherings, whispering knowledge into his ear before Jafar could even walk. Medina in those days was not the city of peace it is known as today. It was a place of surveillance, unrest, and political tensions under the Umayyad Caliphate. The tragedy of Karbala was still fresh in the hearts of the lovers of Ahlul Bayt, a.s. The streets where Jafar, played as a child were also the same streets where whispers of betrayal, fear, and mourning traveled quietly. Families still wept for Hussein, a.s., and every 10th of Muharram carried the weight of collective grief. And yet, in the house of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, a.s., there was not only mourning, there was also revival. As a young boy, Jafar, a.s., would sit beside his father and watch him teach the Quran, narrate the hadith of the Prophet, pbuh, and explain deep layers of Islamic philosophy. But these weren't simple lessons, they were legacies being passed down. His father would tell him, "My son, our knowledge is not from books alone. It is from the heart of Rasulullah, pbuh, passed from Ali, a.s., to Hussein, a.s., and now to us. Carry it with sincerity and silence." And so Jafar, a.s., listened. He absorbed. It was said that before the age of 10, the boy had memorized the Quran and mastered Arabic grammar, logic, and jurisprudence. His teachers were the finest, not just scholars but martyrs, not just jurists but imams. And yet, his demeanor remained one of humility. He never claimed knowledge, he simply shared it. By the time he reached his teenage years, Jafar al-Sadiq, a.s., was already respected among the scholars of Medina. Even senior jurists would lower their voices in his presence. Yet he rarely spoke unless asked, and never argued unless the truth was being obscured. The political climate began to shift in the early 100s AH. The Umayyad dynasty, known for its corruption and hostility toward the Prophet's family, was nearing its decline. Revolts began to stir, and among the chaos, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, a.s., increased his teaching, and so did his son. Together, they were rebuilding Islamic knowledge from within the shadows of tyranny. But what the people of the time perhaps didn't realize was that Jafar al-Sadiq, wasn't only a religious figure, he was being prepared to be the intellectual revival of Islam. He learned chemistry and astronomy, not from foreign texts, but through divine inspiration and observation of Allah's signs. Later in his life, he would mentor men like Jabir ibn Hayyan, who is known today as the father of early chemistry. He also taught Hisham ibn al-Hakam, a theologian who defended the concept of imamate with logical precision against the Greek philosophers of the time. But we'll return to that later. Because for now, our story still rests in the early years. One of the most significant lessons young Jafar, a.s., learned in these formative years was the silent power of patience. He witnessed firsthand how his grandfather, Imam Zayn al-Abidin, a.s., survived the massacre of Karbala only to spend the rest of his life in worship and silent resistance. He saw how his own father taught from behind closed doors, under threat of death, yet never stopped speaking the truth. This left an impression deeper than any sword could carve. In one early conversation recorded by his companions, a scholar once asked him, "O son of Muhammad al-Bakir, why do you smile when others fear the rulers?" And the young Imam replied gently, "Fear belongs to those who chase the world. We seek Allah, what is there to fear when He is near?" This humility, mixed with unwavering conviction, became his signature. As he approached adulthood, he became known not only as Jafar, but as al-Sadiq, the truthful. Not because he called himself so, but because his enemies and followers alike found no lie in him, no exaggeration, no pride. He was precise in knowledge and sincere in character. He debated with scholars from all backgrounds, atheists, Christians, and Muslims alike, not to win arguments, but to unveil the light of truth. He often said, "Knowledge is a light that Allah places in the heart of the one He loves. It is not memorized from books, but drawn from sincerity and submission." By the time he was in his early 30s, the world had begun to notice that this son of al-Bayt was not like the others they had seen. He wasn't rallying armies or seeking thrones. He was building hearts. He was planting seeds that would later grow into one of the most powerful Islamic intellectual legacies ever known. But then, came the moment that would change his role forever. In the year 114 AH, 732 CE, his father, Imam Muhammad al-Bakir, A.S., was poisoned and martyred by the tyrant rulers of the time. The loss was personal, deep, and world-shifting. But in the pain of loss came the rise of responsibility. The imamate, the divine leadership of the Ummah, was now on the shoulders of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, A.S. The ocean had begun to rise. And the world would never be the same. The martyrdom of Imam Muhammad al-Bakir, A.S., left a profound void in the hearts of the faithful. But it also marked the dawn of a new chapter, one that would redefine the intellectual, spiritual, and theological foundations of Islam for generations to come. At just 31 years old, Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, A.S., assumed the position of Imam of the Ummah, the sixth divinely appointed guide from the lineage of Prophet Muhammad, Pbuh. Yet, his leadership would not be one of politics, sword, or rebellion. His mission was of a different kind. He would become the teacher of minds and hearts, the Imam who turned silence into scholarship and oppression into opportunity. The early years of Imam al-Sadiq's imamate coincided with a massive transition in the Islamic world. The Umayyad dynasty, weakened by internal corruption and public resentment, was beginning to collapse. In 132 AH, 750 CE, the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads and established their own rule. Though this new dynasty claimed to be closer to al-Bayt, A.S., their actions would soon reveal their true intentions. Like the Umayyads, they feared and oppressed the family of the Prophet. But this period of political distraction gave Imam al-Sadiq, A.S., a rare window. With rulers preoccupied by consolidating power, he found a brief moment of space, one that allowed him to expand his teachings and lay the foundation for an Islamic school of thought that still thrives today. In a small, humble courtyard in Medina, Imam al-Sadiq, A.S., established what many today refer to as the first true Islamic university. But there were no grand halls, marble floors, or ivory towers. The walls were made of clay. The roof was the open sky. The books were the hearts of students, and the teacher was the ocean of knowledge himself. Over the next several years, thousands of students gathered around him, from all parts of the Islamic world. What made his school so unique was that it wasn't limited to only Shia followers. Sunnis, Mutazilites, Sufis, and even non-Muslim thinkers came to benefit from his unmatched depth of understanding. It is said that over 4,000 students studied under Imam al-Sadiq, A.S., learning everything from theology, jurisprudence, Quranic exegesis, hadith, to astronomy, medicine, mathematics, alchemy, agriculture, and even philosophy. One of the most famous students was Jabir ibn Hayyan, a chemist and scholar who is known in the West as Jeber, often regarded as the father of early chemistry. He wrote hundreds of treatises on scientific subjects, many of which began with the words, "My teacher, Jafar ibn Muhammad, taught me." But Imam al-Sadiq's knowledge was not taken from Greek philosophers or Persian scholars. It was inherited, divine, spiritual, and clear. It was the knowledge of the Quran, unlocked by one who had been given its inner meaning. One of Imam al-Sadiq's most profound qualities was the way he taught. He didn't simply lecture, he guided souls. He would patiently listen, ask questions that made others think deeply, and respond with wisdom that was layered yet simple. For example, when asked about Tawheed, oneness of God, he said, "He is a thing, but not like other things. He is existent, but without form. He is one, not in number, but in essence." When a man challenged him on imamate, the Imam asked, "Do you think Allah would leave his creation without a guide, while even a house needs a door, and a body needs a heart?" These weren't just answers, they were revelations to those with hearts open to truth. His students memorized not only his words, but also his akhlaq, character. He was never harsh, never boastful. If a guest entered, he stood up. If someone criticized him, he smiled. He taught that knowledge was only meaningful if it transformed the soul. The fame of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, spread quickly. The Abbasid rulers became aware of his influence and began to monitor him closely. But despite the tension, they could not silence his voice. His knowledge became too powerful, too vast, and too respected. The Imam engaged in theological debates with Christians, atheists, and scholars from various sections. One of the most well-known stories is his debate with Ibn Abi al-Ajah, a famous atheist. The man tried to mock the existence of God, but Imam al-Sadiq responded with such calm and rational clarity that the man left speechless. In one moment, Imam said, "Have you ever boarded a ship without a captain, and it reached the shore safely?" The atheist replied, "No, such a thing is impossible." The Imam smiled gently and said, "Then how can this vast universe run without a creator?" This simple question became legendary, not only for its logic but for its beauty. Imam al-Sadiq's imamate marks a pivotal moment in Shia history. It was during his time that the distinct doctrines of the Shia school were formally articulated and spread. He explained the concept of imamate not as a political title, but as a divine station, a leadership appointed by Allah, one that existed alongside prophethood to guide the hearts after revelation had been completed. He emphasized that the imam must be infallible, masum, chosen, and divinely guided. He compiled the hadith of Ahlul Bayt, narrating from his father and grandfather, all the way back to Imam Ali, and the Holy Prophet, Pbuh. His narrations covered fiqh, Islamic law, ethics, and social justice, and these narrations would become the core of the Jafari school of thought, the foundation of Twelver Shia Islam. The followers of Imam al-Sadiq, didn't just admire him, they loved him deeply. They would travel months across deserts just to sit in his presence for a day. Many of them wrote down his teachings in hidden scrolls, for fear of persecution. Others memorized them, word for word, in their hearts. The Imam would often tell them, "Don't just call yourselves Shia. Be our true followers by your actions. Speak the truth, return trusts, and worship Allah sincerely." He didn't want mere loyalty, he wanted transformation. As his school grew, the Abbasid caliphs grew more anxious. Particularly Abu Jafar al-Mansur, the second Abbasid caliph, became increasingly hostile. He feared the spiritual power of Imam al-Sadiq, not because the Imam was seeking a throne, but because truth itself was his throne. Plots were laid. Spies were planted. And slowly, the freedom that had allowed his voice to rise was being choked. But Imam al-Sadiq, never stepped back. He continued teaching, in secret if needed, and planting seeds of faith in the hearts of those who sought knowledge for Allah's sake. The waves of the ocean had begun to stir. And in the shadows of power, the Imam was preparing his final stand, not with a sword, but with the unmatched force of divine wisdom. In the golden city of Medina, where knowledge once blossomed under the humble roof of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, a.s., the winds of change had turned bitter. The Abbasid rulers, particularly Abu Jafar al-Mansur, had now grown painfully aware, this man, who wielded no sword, commanded no army, and sat with the poor instead of kings, held a power they could neither match nor silence. It was not political rebellion they feared. It was his truth. Unlike others who had challenged the ruling empires through uprisings and bloodshed, Imam al-Sadiq, a.s., chose a path of intellectual resistance. Yet, the effect was more lasting than any military campaign. His school of thought, with thousands of students, was becoming the beacon of justice, monotheism, and spiritual revival. His words were being copied, memorized, and carried from city to city. His influence now reached Iraq, Iran, Egypt, and beyond. This deeply unsettled al-Mansur. The caliph began to tighten his grip. He feared that the name of Jafar ibn Muhammad, would soon overshadow that of the Abbasids themselves. The Imam, a.s., though not seeking political power, had captured the hearts of the Ummah, and hearts, once conquered, do not turn back easily. Abu Jafar al-Mansur ordered spies to surround the home of the Imam in Medina. Every gathering was monitored. Every visitor tracked. Informants were planted even among students, though most were too in love with the Imam's wisdom to betray him. False rumors were spread, claiming the Imam was plotting revolution. Mansur even accused the Imam of amassing wealth and supporters for rebellion. But Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, a.s., calm and composed, responded with grace. I have not called people to fight for a throne. I have only called them to recognize their Lord and obey him. Still, the harassment continued. Scholars loyal to the Abbasids were told to challenge the Imam publicly. But time after time, they failed, because the Imam's knowledge was not borrowed, it was divine. In one of the most painful moments, al-Mansur ordered the arrest of Imam al-Sadiq, a.s. He was summoned from Medina to Kufa, interrogated, and humiliated. But every word the Imam spoke made it clear, he was not a man to be broken. In one encounter, al-Mansur tried to threaten him. Why do the people love you more than me? Why do they follow you? The Imam replied. Because I feed their souls with truth. You feed their fears with power. Unable to find any fault, Mansur released the Imam, but not without placing him under tight surveillance. For the remaining years of his life, Imam al-Sadiq, a.s., was restricted from teaching publicly, his gatherings reduced, and many of his companions were imprisoned or martyred. Yet the Imam did not stop. Secretly, quietly, yet consistently, he continued his mission. With the Abbasid pressure rising, Imam al-Sadiq, a.s., began to teach in small circles, relying on trusted companions. Among them were great scholars like Zurara ibn Ayun, Hisham ibn al-Hakam, Muhammad ibn Muslim, Mu'min al-Tak. These men became the silent carriers of the Imam's legacy, preserving every word, every ruling, and every insight. One night, Imam al-Sadiq, a.s., gathered them and said, These are not ordinary times. What I teach you today must be guarded like treasure. There will come a time when even remembering my name will be forbidden. Prepare yourselves. It was not fear that drove his caution, it was wisdom. The Imam knew that his mission was long-term, and to preserve the truth, one must often act in silence. Despite his knowledge, status, and the lineage of the Holy Prophet, Pbuh, Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, a.s., faced extreme hardship. He saw his followers tortured, his students exiled, and his family targeted. He received reports of innocent Shia families being imprisoned for simply mentioning his name. His eyes would fill with tears, not out of defeat, but deep sorrow for a nation that continued to reject truth. One day, a companion found him weeping during prayer. He asked, Ya Ibn Rasulillah, what has made you cry like this? The Imam answered, How can I not cry when I hear the names of those who sacrificed their lives for truth, and yet the people do not even remember them? Their blood has watered the soil of Islam, but the flowers are denied sunlight. As time passed, al-Mansur's anger grew. He could not tolerate the Imam's continued influence, even in silence. It is recorded in multiple reliable Shia sources that the Caliph finally made a cruel decision, to end the life of the Imam. He sent poison through a secret envoy, disguised as a gift. The Imam, aware of the plots, accepted his fate with calm resignation. What Allah wills will come to pass. And we are content with his decree. Shortly after consuming the poisoned food, the Imam began to fall gravely ill. The pain was unbearable, but not once did he cry out. Not once did he curse his enemies. Instead, he prayed, performed wudu, ablution, and gave final instructions to his family. Among his last words were, "O Allah, be my witness. I pass this knowledge to the trustworthy, and I leave this world with nothing but love for you." In 148 AH, 765 CE, Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, A.S., was martyred, at the age of 65. His funeral was attended by close family and trusted followers, and his blessed body was buried in Jannat al-Baqi, the same cemetery in Medina that holds the graves of other holy members of Ahlul Bayt, A.S. But even as his body returned to the earth, his legacy had already taken root. The Jafari school of Islamic thought would go on to be the theological backbone of Twelver Shia Islam. His teachings would be preserved in thousands of hadiths. His students would spread his knowledge from Medina to Baghdad, Kufa to Khorasan. His resistance, patience, and wisdom would become an eternal beacon for seekers of truth. Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, A.S., once said, "Our knowledge is a river. And from it flows wisdom that has no end." Indeed, his life was that river, patient, clear, and pure. And from that river, emerged an ocean so vast that no empire, no caliph, no enemy could drown it. Even today, more than 1,200 years later, millions still call him their Imam. Scholars still quote his words. Philosophers still study his insights. And lovers of Ahlul Bayt, still mourn his martyrdom, not with fear, but with the resolve to carry his mission forward. The light of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, A.S., may have left the earth in 148 AH, but what he left behind was not mere memory, it was a living legacy, an ocean of knowledge, and a spiritual compass that still guides the seekers of truth today. Unlike most scholars whose influence fades after death, the work of Imam al-Sadiq, only grew stronger after his martyrdom. His school, based in Medina, had no marble halls or towering gates. It had no political funding, nor did it bear any royal title. Yet it produced more than 4,000 students, including some of the greatest minds in Islamic history. These students, from various backgrounds, philosophers, jurists, chemists, theologians, and mystics, carried his words far and wide. They preserved his teachings in volumes of hadith, transmitted them through generations, and infused them into the Jafari school of thought, now followed by millions of Shia Muslims worldwide. Perhaps one of the most stunning aspects of the Imam's legacy is how he bridged science and spirituality. In a time when the world was clouded with superstition and myth, Imam al-Sadiq, taught his students about anatomy, astronomy, chemistry, physics, and medicine, but always through the lens of divine wisdom. He explained the expansion of the universe, the circulation of blood, the laws of nature, and the depths of the soul, centuries before modern scientists confirmed them. One of his most famous students, Jabir ibn Hayyan, known as the father of chemistry, wrote over 100 treatises based on the knowledge he received from the Imam. But Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, never claimed these truths for worldly fame. "True knowledge is a light placed in the heart of one whom Allah loves," he once said. His teachings were not about power. They were about enlightenment. And this is why his legacy outlived empires. For the Shia Muslims, Imam al-Sadiq, became the pillar of theological development. He laid down the principles of fiqh, jurisprudence, usul, foundations, and aqaid, beliefs. His narrations shaped the Ahlul Bayt, as worldview, rooted in reason, justice, and submission to the one true God. Even as the political world shifted from Umayyads to Abbasids and beyond, the school of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, as, remained unchanged, unwavering, and untouched in its purity. From the smallest issue of daily prayer to the grandest questions of divine justice, his answers carried not just logic, but the fragrance of prophetic wisdom. Today, in universities, seminaries, and homes around the world, from Najaf to Qom, Karbala to California, his name is revered. His words are still read on pulpits. His legacy is still defended with pride. His patience, his courage, and his refusal to bow to tyrants continue to inspire scholars, youth, and ordinary believers alike. His teachings have been translated into hundreds of languages. His narrations are quoted in both Sunni and Shia collections. And his philosophy of faith through intellect continues to attract minds from all walks of life. Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, as, once said, "When you learn knowledge, practice it. For knowledge without action is like a tree without fruit." And so, the Shia continue not just to study his words, but to live by them. His ocean of knowledge flows in the hearts of believers who stand for justice, speak with wisdom, and worship with sincerity. He did not leave behind castles or armies. He left behind something far more powerful, truth. To know Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, as, is to know what it means to be truly free, free from fear, from ignorance, from oppression. He taught us that resistance is not always loud, and revolution does not always carry a sword. Sometimes, it comes through a whisper of wisdom, a single answered question, or a man sitting in the courtyard of a mosque with a pen, changing the course of history. He was not just the Imam of his time. He is the Imam of intellect, the Imam of truth, and the Imam of every soul seeking the light of Ahlul Bayt, as. And that is why, even today, the ocean of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, as, has no shore.